over. Do you believe that needs to be in our children's classrooms? Do you think that is inappropriate, or can you give some type of explanation for that? That is in a book called Let's Talk About It.
It appears to be a graphic description related to masturbation.
That's exactly what it is.
I could see this.
Really?
I mean, it depends on it.
She just, in her words, this appears to be a graphic description of masturbation. Yeah, I could see this in the schools. And welcome everybody to another amazing episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today we've got some great topics for you guys. We're going to look over the Senate Bill 5 proceedings. More so, we're going to watch the ACLU representative somehow defend why we need essentially sexually graphic material in our schools as they're looking at Senate Bill 5. We'll talk about that today. Additionally, as well, we're going to talk about House Bill 5, the barrel tax bill, the ins and outs of that bill, why if you vote for it, it's okay, why if you vote against it, it's also okay, or at least why I think you can have a reasoning on either side of that bill. And then finally, the city of Covington is very upset over legislation being considered by the legislature because, well, it might mean they can no longer groom children. And of course, this city feels very, very strongly about that. The city of Covington does. So catch all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But before we get to that, please like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that like button, hit something like that. And before we dig into it, additionally as well, run on over to Andrew4ky.com. Once again, that's Andrew4ky.com and join and support the Andrew Cooperrider campaign for state treasurer. You can donate there, of course, and you can always be telling others about what we have going on. So without further ado, let's dig into it. Let's start off with Senate Bill 5. Senate Bill 5 is a bill that would provide some better ways for parents to get obscene materials removed from the school libraries and from their schools. Why has this become an issue? Well, if you remember in some prior podcasts, I talked about an issue going on in the Jefferson County Public Schools regarding some books, and these books have centered all over. They're in Lexington, they're in a lot of these other districts. And what these books are is under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion and LGBTQ, whatever, these books essentially are porn. That's what they are. They go into graphic details over a lot of things under the guise of saying, well, it's just to inform people about the LGBTQ lifestyle. And with that being said, oh, that's one thing to say, well, we're going to inform them about it. I would question why that is so important to people, that they need to make sure kids are informed about. Trust me, they know. You don't need to specifically inform them. But then two, the way this information takes place is by looking like essentially a graphic depictions. It's like saying, I need to inform people about the straight lifestyle. Therefore, I need to explain to them in graphic detail how to perform gross sexual acts in order to make sure they understand the straight lifestyle. Of course, we would never advocate for that. We'd see that as wrong and illegal and exposing children to unnecessary sexual material. But for the LGBTQ side of things, I guess they have a different line that they want to draw. And so seeing enough of this, the legislature this year has been considering a few bills. One of those is Senate Bill 5, which would prescribe a process for parents to remove these books from it. So to simply say a few things, but one, provides a more clear process to get a book removed from the library. And then if the book being removed from the library is still decided kept in, well, then the parent can say, look, I simply want to make sure you don't let my child check out that book, which seems pretty simple and easy. Put a note on the account that says children cannot check out this book, to make sure your child is not being exposed to it and is not accessing sexually explicit material without your consent. This seems straightforward. This seems like an easy thing, something everybody should be in favor of. But instead, we see the crazies coming out and claiming all kinds of crazy, uncontrollable things. One of those being that this is book banning. Understand this. Nobody's burning this book. We're simply saying what you can't buy if the book through this process is determined to not even be allowed in the libraries. We're simply stating what you can't buy with taxpayer dollars. Understand that public schools and public libraries are being funded by taxpayer dollars. We're not saying this book can't be sold. We're not saying you can't buy this book. We're not saying this book can't be printed. We're simply saying this book cannot be bought using taxpayer dollars and put into our libraries. That's not book ban, but of course that's what they'd love to reframe to refer it as, a book ban. Additionally, as well, simply stating that your child can't have access to this material, that is also not a book ban. You're simply saying that I don't want my child reading this, and I expect the school to make sure they don't expose them to it. When it comes to things like, when it comes to even the sex ed classes, things like that, there's still permission slips involved in that process. You can still opt your kids out of that. And so this is just prescribing a process to opt your child out of getting access to sexually explicit material. This seems basic and straightforward, but darn it, if the ACLU can't make it seem like you're trying to actually turning into Hitler, like if they can't make it do it. So let's take a look at this testimony that went on with the ACLU in this hearing, and listen to what they say here. It is quite telling how they feel about it. It is quite telling how how strongly they feel about, well, quite a lot, quite frankly. It is ridiculous and out of control. The way that I don't know. Let's let's take a listen here. Let's listen to this ACLU individual here. And occasionally, if you see the screen being black, if you're watching this, that is not my fault. That is due to the LRC, but you can still hear the audio pretty clearly.
And I use she, her pronouns. Chairman West, members of the
Let's rewind that just a little bit. Sorry.
This is a slippery slope, I think.
Oh,
and I think this bill is misguided. Thank you very much.
By the way, Chuck Eddy, right before the ACLU person came on, this guy named Chuck Eddy, who some of you may know as a liberal troll online, decided to testify on this bill, which is concerning considering he does not have a child or grandchild in the public school system in Kentucky. This in no way, shape, or form affects him or affects his children, but he did feel a need to take some time to sit down and testify about why he believes that your children have to be exposed to this smut and this content. But let's listen to the ACLU here.
Next, we have Kate Miller. Please introduce yourself to the committee and please proceed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Miller. I'm the Advocacy Director at the ACLU of Kentucky, and I use she, her pronouns. Chairman West.
All right. Now, I'm going to tell you this much. I knew we were in for quite the experience when she, as she informed me I could call her, began off with announcing her pronouns. I'm going to give you a hot tip. Here's a hot tip to any liberals out there that want to argue on items before a Republican legislature when it comes to social war items. If you want to seem reasonable and you don't want immediately to be discredited, please begin off by announcing your pronouns. Of course, something that is one of the most ridiculous things in the world, we all can tell you probably go by she, despite the fact that and understand this is an ACL representative that's showing up to testify on this item. And not that I always wear the nicest clothing, as some people have talked about. You know, one day I wore a t-shirt and my hat here doing a podcast, and man, you would think that I literally wore nothing with some of the comments I got. But we are going to mention you're trying to testify on a bill. And quite frankly, when you look at who's behind this individual, you're seeing some other young people. At first, when I saw her, I thought she was just another student, but she apparently works for the ACLU. And as you find out later, she has a child. But when you look behind here, she is the least dressed person there. Look at the kids behind her. They are all very well dressed. I know they're probably there advocating for the chance to get to read this smut. I can respect the fact they have a different of opinion, because they are all cleanly dressed, clearly there to represent these ideas as best you can. Something very simple. You want to come, you want to represent your ideas, you want to win. When the best ways to do that is by at least dressing a little bit better. But instead, she's wearing, I don't know what she's wearing, but I would describe it as not the most professional in appearance. And then to follow that up, you're saying she, her pronouns, which, like I said, you're going to lose me. If I'm a senator sitting up there and you're about to testify in front of me and you begin off by saying, I have she, her pronouns, I'm like, oh my goodness. I would roll my eyes and be like, here we go. I can tell you don't need to announce yourself, but they can't help it. They know it hurts their case they're about to make, but they literally can't help it. They have to say it. Let's continue.
Members of the Education Committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. Of course, you can't really bring a bill related to obscenity without the ACLU having something to comment on, so I appreciate your attention. Senate Bill 5 is not a particularly new idea or overly complicated. From our perspective, it is the most recent example of state-sponsored censorship. The debates over whether to allow certain books within schools or students access to certain books within school is really losing the sight of the overarching function of schools to train young people to think for themselves. The First Amendment protects the right to learn for all students, and in 1957, the United States Supreme Court explained the essential role that schools play in helping young people develop into the reflective citizens that a democracy needs to survive. They stated that the nation's future depended upon leaders trained through a wide exposure of robust exchange of ideas.
So let's understand this. She is the argument she just is laying out. And I know you don't quite understand some of what she's defending. We're going to get to what she defends because this happens in her questioning. But she is actually stating that we must expose children to child explicit material in order to ensure a robust democratic conversation. It is important to our democracy that your child is exposed to gender queer books like Not Every Boy is Blue and Gender Queer. We continue, though.
Which discovers truth out of a multitude of tongues. And I think all of us can agree in this prolific age of social media that students in particular are receiving a lot of different information, and we've got to equip them to be able to find what's true. Just last year, the Supreme Court emphasized that in schools, learning how to tolerate speech of all kinds is part of learning in a pluralistic society. A trait of character.
Now, understand, once again, sorry for the black screen that of her video, but that's not my fault. It's the state KT. Apparently, we don't give them enough. But anyway, to have working video. But anyways, understand, once again, we are not, she's talking about this like we're trying to ban some topic of some sort. She is not addressing the fact, and this will come across her, where she will be asked. Later on, Senator Tishner will ask her about some pretty specific examples, and you'll hear she can't handle it. And as she's talking about this, she is acting like this smut. You need to be exposed to this smut in order to know what's true or not. In order to it has some sort of learning values.
Essential to a tolerant citizenry. It appears that this most...
And if you are not, and understand that, essential to a tolerant citizenry, if your child isn't exposed to books like Genderqueer, where they have advertisements for porn websites and ferociously with images describe things like masturbation and genitalia and things like that, if they aren't exposed to that, well, they won't be tolerant. I guess that may be true. They won't be tolerant of sexual deviance. That would be true, but we continue. And really, who wants a society that is tolerant of that? I mean, who wants a society where we're tolerant of exposing children to sexually explicit materials? Apparently the left does, as you will continue to hear. But frankly, it's ridiculous.
Example, maybe in response to a book or books related to sexual orientation or gender identity. But in years past, the focus has been on race, and in coming years, it will be on something new. But what's not new is that this legislature, irrespective of party, has always and probably will always prioritize censoring viewpoints that are inconsistent with their own. Sometimes we think that actually lawmakers may inadvertently censor materials that are consistent with your values. As the last speaker mentioned, certainly the Bible has shown up on banned book lists, I think as recently as 2016. And given the definition of harmful materials outlined in the bill and thankfully by the sponsor, Senator Howe, there are a number of passages in religious texts that quite explicitly describe genitalia as well as descriptions of sexual acts, some of which are criminal. Senate Bill 5 is part of a long tradition of government censorship. And for those of you all that have been on the committee for a while, you know that the ACLU testifying against them is part of our long tradition of opposing what we believe is an abuse of power. Children's First Amendment rights do not end at the schoolhouse gate. And in the interest of education, I urge you to vote no.
They have a First Amendment right.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Real quickly, if you'll stay right there. Do we have any questions for Kate, Mrs. Miller? Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kate, where is the line? If there's a book that promotes pedophilia in a school, is that acceptable?
I think that one thing that this piece of legislation is intended to do is to facilitate conversations between children and their parents.
You're not answering my question.
Well, I think it's without having a specific text.
Yes or no?
Should a book that promotes pedophilia can you
be allowed in our schools? Yes or no?
Well, I guess you and I might.
Yes or no, please.
I don't know because.
Okay.
Because we have
That's
a book.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I have a question.
Senator Meredith.
She could not answer. She could not answer whether or not books with pedophilia in it should be allowed. It's an easy answer. No, it shouldn't be allowed. Any explicit descriptions of pedophilia should not be allowed. That's an easy answer. That's a gimme. She can't even answer the gimmies right. What is going on here? We actually have somebody defending that can't say child pedophilia should not be allowed in the schools. She can't say that. I am blown away at a lot of this testimony, but we're going to keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm always interested in people's interpretation of legislation that is different than the intent of the legislation. And I appreciate your testimony, but I think this whole thing is preceded by the comment in an obscene manner. Mm-hmm. Now, the reference you made to the Bible, yeah, there's discussions about sex, but it's not presented in an obscene manner. So isn't that the criteria to be used as whether this material should be provided to our children or not? If it's presented in an obscene manner, should schools be able to have that material?
I think.
And also offensive and prevailing standards. All those things qualify these things. It's not just a gross ban on the subject matter. It's these criteria. Do these not apply?
May I respond? So I think that what the ACLU's concern has always been and continues to be is that the government and the citizenry may define obscene differently, and something that may be considered obscene. For example, from the last discussion, I have a book on consent that I talked to my 3-year-old about that I think.
Of course you do. Of course you're teaching your 3-year-old about consent. It's like a meme. It's like, of course you do. Of course you have a book about consent that you teach to your 3-year-old. I
think is appropriate for her age group, but someone from this committee might not feel comfortable using that same material, and it's not my decision to determine that for you, and we don't believe it's your decision to determine it for us.
Once again, we're not, as much as I think that it's stupid that you have and ridiculous, and you're probably sexualizing your children and you're gearing them up for bad conversations, to have a book about consent for a 3-year-old. Well, I think that's ridiculous. I'm not telling you you can't have that. This bill is not telling you you can't have those private conversations at home. This bill is about what's exposed to children at school away from their parents.
But there's 3 different criteria here that grade that appropriately. Obscene material, appeal to parents' interest in sex, offensive and prevailing standards. So you don't think those 3 things in combination are sufficient safeguards for this?
I think that they could be. I think it depends on the principal of a school. I think it depends on the particular text that we're discussing.
Should it contend on what parents might think about it?
Absolutely, which is why, the idea of me as a parent going to my school, my child's school, and telling them to ensure that my child doesn't have access to a particular text, I think is an abdication of the responsibility.
No, that is your response. See, and this is where she's trying to go. She's trying to say, well, if you don't want your kid to see it, then it's your job as a parent to make sure they don't see it. The school has no duty here. But what the law is allowing is this parent to come in and tell the school, while they are away from me, you're to ensure they do not see this book or this material because I don't want them to. Period. That is you doing your job. The only other way you could more fulfill your obligation, as this crazy liberal believes, is to sit there with your child all day long in school to make sure they don't have it. I am dropping my kid off at school. I can expect them to not be exposed to material I, as a parent, don't want them to. This is me. This is like saying that they shouldn't have to follow me. This is the same logic. They shouldn't have to put blockers on the computers at school to make sure you don't access obscene websites at school, because that's the parent's job to make sure the kid knows not to access them. So the parent can have these software to stop kids from accessing it at home. But what she is essentially saying is if you ask the schools to have that, that's too far. That's your job, just to tell your kid not to do it and then your kid not to do it. Because apparently the idea that your children would do things that they're told not to do outside of the home is just completely foreign to this crazy lady who teaches her 3-year-old about consent.
Of the parent, they shouldn't put that burden on the school. That's the child and the parent's relationship.
Well, that's exactly what it does. It puts a process in place, a due process in place, so parents can ask to this to be judged, and somebody makes a final determination. It's just not banning books wholesale or literature wholesale. There's a process in place that's being defined here. It uses this criteria to determine what's obscene and what's not, what should be available to young people or not. And it goes back to Senator Carroll's question, where's the line here?
Well,
who determines the line?
We don't think the state should.
Then who should? Should parents? That's a great idea, I believe.
In this particular piece of legislation,
we don't think the state should. Because, okay, what is their, we don't think the state should. Okay, so who should? Well, I think she's about to say, if I remember properly, that she thinks the schools should, maybe. But the schools are a form of government. They're all government. It's like they forget that they're government schools. And they also forget that almost half of our state budget goes to these schools. If the state doesn't have a right to come in and dictate things going on, and they're footing the bill for half of it, who else does? Another government entity? They're all still government. If ACLU's belief is that government shouldn't be doing this, then ACL's belief is that no one should be limiting this. No one. That's what she believes. But instead, she's like, well, maybe just not the state. Why? Because you disagree with the state in this circumstance.
It also is incumbent upon the school to ensure that the child does not have access.
It says that the parents protest, ask the principal to intervene. There's a due process outlined here in the decisions made. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think that's not necessarily just what we're concerned with. It's that irrespective of that decision that's made through that process, it's still this responsibility, from my understanding, of the school to ensure, even if at the end of that process the principal says, look, we do think that this Harry Potter may be an example. Harry Potter should remain in the library. The parent can still come back and say, you need to make sure my child doesn't have access to Harry Potter. And I think that that's an unreasonable responsibility to.
It's unreasonable responsibility for them to put one note on that kid's library account to say, don't check out this book to them.
Place on a school system, and it's something that a parent should engage their child on rather than rely on the state to protect their child from those ideas.
But you're saying just the opposite. You're allowing an institution to, in fact, raise our children and make the final determination as to what's right and what's wrong for them. Do parents not have any right in this process?
I think that for my family, it would be completely reasonable for me to meaningfully engage in a conversation with my child over what we think is appropriate and what isn't appropriate and what our values are as a family. An idea isn't something that should scare me. I mean, all of our children are going to be exposed to radical ideas. I'd rather us have conversations about it than ask the school to prohibit them from being able to access something that's inconsistent with my values.
Well, I'd still like to see an answer to Senator Carroll's question about where do we draw the line on this, and I don't think that this bill is unreasonable by any means, but thank you.
So she's saying, I don't think I should ask the school to make sure that they don't see my value. Well, kids will be exposed to all this anyways, and blah, blah, blah. And the point is that I agree they'll be exposed, but the idea is to have the parent there. And if they're at school being exposed to it, they're being exposed by the librarian. They're being exposed to it by the teachers. That's who's around them, not somebody who's consistent with their values. Now, we're going to speed up just a little bit here to get to a point where I believe Lindsay Tishner talks, because for a little bit, Senator Thomas basically jumps in and says something silly. So here, I believe, is Tishner.
I'll try to keep it short.
She was on the list.
Thank you. Mr. Eddy, the book they were referring to with pedophilia, it's Lomboy, so you can check that out at your local school library. Okay. So, and Senator Thomas, there is a definition of pornography that you're talking about, and that was referenced by that Supreme Court ruling, and you'll know it when you see it was specifically in regards to pornography. And obscenity has been defined clearly in our statutes, but it's also been defined in U.S. code as well. I just sent something to you. You can flip it over. Do you believe that needs to be in our children's classrooms? Do you think that is inappropriate, or can you give some type of explanation for that? That is in a book called Let's Talk About It.
It appears to be a graphic description related to masturbation.
That's exactly what it is.
I could see this.
Really?
I mean, it depends on
She just, in her words, this appears to be a graphic description of masturbation. Yeah, I could see this in the schools. They're under 18. A graphic description of masturbation is pornography. It is illegal to expose children to pornography. Yet this ACLU attorney is defending the grooming of children and showing them pornography as minors.
I think the age group of individuals, and I would understand if parents felt uncomfortable talking to their children about masturbation, but I think it's an appropriate conversation for people to engage in, including individuals who are in Kentucky schools.
So you feel like a teacher should teach children in the school system how to masturbate. How would you not define that as grooming?
I think that it's the I think that what we're talking about here is whether or not students should be prohibited from accessing certain materials, not whether or not teachers are required to educate students on how to masturbate.
So with this being available for distribution in a school, you feel like materials on masturbation should be allowed in the school for distribution?
I think, Senator Tichenor, Kentucky has, I think we're number 5 in rates of sexual abuse.
Exactly, yes.
And I think...
Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that you are deciding to sexualize minors by having, and your words, graphic descriptions of masturbation, and you believe that's okay?
Part of why
Oh, no, that's not what she believes. No, she actually believes that's part of why we should defend this. The fact that we are a sexually sick society is why we should teach minors about masturbation. That's what she's about to say.
I'm talking to my 3-year-old about consent is because I need my child to be able to confidently and accurately describe incidents that may be inappropriate or may be unsafe. And I think that students having an understanding of their sexuality and their sexual health makes them safer and more equipped.
Oh, okay. Graphically describing masturbation to a child makes them safer and more equipped to deal with it when they're sexually assaulted by people who are sexualized as well.
And more empowered, because I think one of the reasons people don't talk about sexual abuse and sexual assault is because of the shame that you feel that you were somehow responsible or guilty for what happened to you. And so I think having open and honest conversations about sexuality empowers my child to be able to stand up for herself and talk to me or a trusted adult when something wrong happens to her, God forbid.
And I think you're making our point for us. You as the parent are having those discussions with your child. And that's what this bill is going to return the parents' right to be able to have these discussions. And when you're talking about a high sexual abuse rate in this state, I would argue clearly that when we're desensitizing children to sexual things and making this content available in schools, you're opening the door for sexual abuse. You're giving kids, you're desensitizing them simply to sexual things in a way, in a place, in a manner, in a public school where it doesn't belong. That is a parent's responsibility to expose them when the parents feel the child is ready. The parent might not feel the child is ready in 9th grade or in 6th grade where this book could be found to see some of these things within a public school being funded by public tax dollars.
Also, as well, in the ACLU person's response, she herself drew a line. She said, well, it's age appropriate. Okay, so there is a line that you think should exist about what age that should be exposed to somebody in, and you are yourself saying that a line exists, but can't handle it.
I mean, I think that would be a good opportunity to have a conversation. I mean, we all are listening to the same radio stations and watching the same television. Our kids are flooded with descriptions of sexual activity, and many of which are inconsistent with our own values, which vary widely. I mean, probably you and I share some, have some consensus over what would be appropriate for our child or not. But when my child is exposed to something that isn't appropriate,
she's talking about, oh, this is where we need to have conversations. Conversations aren't happening with the parent. That's the thing. These books have been tried to be talked about. You can't even read what's in these books or describe. They can't show you what Lindsay handed her because it would violate the FCC regulations. They can't show you what's in there. People get kicked out of school boards for reading what's in there. And then they have no recourse, though, to remove it from in front of their children.
Appropriate. We have a conversation then and there about why we.
And frankly, we shouldn't be exposing any kids to this stuff. At 6 years, in the 6th grade. That's what Lindsay said. This book was found in the 6th grade. They could check out this book that has, in the ACLU's terms, graphic descriptions of masturbation. My son's in the 5th grade.
Don't think it's appropriate. We don't try to shut the conversation down and keep her from talking to us about it.
Again, you are having the conversation.
Thank you, Lindsay. You are.
Not the teacher, not the librarian, not the school. It's you as the parent having that conversation and regulating what they do see on television and what access they have to those types of materials.
That'll have to be the last word in this segment. Thank you.
All right, so there you go. Of course, that bill passes. It'll go to the floor. That bill will most likely pass, of course. But it just goes to show how out of touch these people are and how dedicated they are to the idea that they absolutely have to. They have to groom these children. They have to expose them to these things, despite the fact that any slightly discerning person would obviously be able to tell it's wrong. And frankly, while I think that person may be well-intentioned, their ideas are very evil. Her ideas are evil. The fact that you would stand there and defend exposing children to pornography, to pedophilia, you would defend exposing 6th graders to graphic depictions of masturbation and do it seriously is quite the problem. It's quite the problem. Okay, moving on. That was Senate Bill 5. Let's talk about House Bill 5. That's a barrel tax bill. What this is it's a special tax that exists in Kentucky's where locales, counties, and cities can impose a tax on barrels of bourbon or alcohol barrels that are aging in their area, and they get a special tax off each barrel. This bill is attempting to remove that tax. Now, there's a problem here. There's some problems here. There's twofold here. One, I believe this is a stupid tax. Understand, I believe it is stupid that we have a tax on a specific industry in a specific way that's simply storing alcohol. That's what they're essentially doing. They're aging bourbon. They're storing alcohol. They're not even selling it. It's just sitting there being stored, but we have a tax on them for it. So it's a stupid tax for that reason. That's what I believe. But at the same time, I also understand that a lot of these cities like Bardstown, like Nelson County, that Bardstown in, their schools, their systems, their roads, their bridges, all those things, they don't have a great way to fund them because of their usage. See, they're being used a lot by tourism. The bourbon industry attracts tourism to the area. That uses up services. It wears down your roads. Police have to be involved. Fire. People staying in hotels in the area, using up the utilities, water, everything else. They use that up in the area, and the cities and counties have to provide those services. However, because the only way they can't tax off tourism. In the state of Kentucky, the way our taxing system is set up, you can't make money off tourism if you're a county in your city, because you can't put in place the types of taxes that capture those revenues, because we're addicted. As a state, we are set up to look at an income tax. What we need to do as a state is we need to get rid of income tax completely at all levels, and then allow a sales tax to be the way they do it. And if we did that, your local cities and counties would be better able to capture those revenues off tourism. But right now they don't have a way to capture those revenues, but they do have to supply those services that have to be funded. I'm not a big government guy. I think government does too much. I think the state does too much. I think the federal government does too much. I think sometimes you can find local governments like the city of Lexington that does way too much as well, or Louisville. We don't need another art installation. Just fill the potholes, please. But there's a lot of small local counties, rural counties, local cities that they don't do too much. They're just trying to do the basics. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there's not corruption and misspending and waste. Of course there is. But they are just simply trying to do the basics. The basics. And while they're trying to do the basics and they have this tourism coming in, they can't capture revenue off it. That's a barrel tax. So I could vote. I could see people voting for getting rid of the barrel tax and saying it's a stupid tax, because I think it is. I see people saying we should keep it because we haven't done the work we need to do in order to make it so these counties and cities can survive off tourism dollars. And in order to eliminate this barrel tax, which is just trying to make up for the fact that they cannot pull revenues off tourism dollars at all. Like I said, small government guy, I'm a low taxing guy. Our cities, our federal government and our states are taxing us to death. They leave barely anything left over that the local counties and cities can put in place in order to pay for actual revenues. Our taxing system is all upside down. The federal government's paying the most, state government's the next, and then the counties and cities, despite the fact that the counties and cities are the ones providing most of the services. That needs to be inverse, but that's not what we're seeing. So that's House Bill 5, the barrel tax. How should you vote on it? I don't know. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad, but take it how you can. Take it how you can. That's just my opinion on it. Finally, we've got the city of Covington is very, very upset that you would ever consider not allowing them to host events that expose minors to drag. It's from the city of Covington. They posted this on their Facebook. Bye to Pride, ? City. Now this is on their official city Facebook page, official city Facebook page. Bye to Pride, ? City of Covington officials are strongly condemning legislation being considered by the Kentucky General Assembly that apparently would shut down the city's annual Pride Parade, Pride Fest, and drag shows, and release events at such prominent and related events at such prominent Covington businesses as Hotel Covington, Braxton Brewing Company, and the Standard Restaurant, Covington Yard, and many other places. Why is it that they're upset about it? What about these bills? Well, there's bills like you can't have it X amount of distance away from a home. So if you want to strip or do a sexualized performance, if you want to dress as the opposite sex because you get off on it, those are your kicks, and you want to do a performance, then you can do that, but not where children can see it. That's what these bills are trying to do. So these private places having these events inside, they would be just simply shut down from allowing kids in. And I guess they're so addicted. They're like, well, if I can't show kids drag shows, I mean, that's what the city of Covington's saying. They're saying, well, if we can't expose kids to drag shows, what's the point of having them? Which I guess really explains what they were doing with them in the first place. If they're that upset over the fact that they're not going to be allowed to expose children to it, that they got to make sure minors do not watch adults cross-dress and then simulate sex in front of children, that they're so committed to that they're like, well, we're just going to have to shut it all down. We're just going to have to shut it. And on top of that, they're using tax dollars to fight this. They're using tax dollars to advocate against it. They're using tax dollars to make posts about it. They're using tax dollars in these kinds of obscene ways to promote their obscene lifestyles, to promote getting to show children cross-dressing men that then perform sexualized performances. They're so dedicated to it. What's it say about our society that we have actual cities in Kentucky that they're so dedicated to making sure children get to watch this, that they will spend your tax dollars to fight against laws that say kids can't watch sexualized performances. Kids can't be doing it. Well, guys, that's what we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, once again, visit the Andrew4ky.com. Check that out. Thank you guys for listening into the podcast. Please share this out. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day.